welcome to another Clutch Burners podcast. This is your home for stick shift drag racing, stick shift tech, and all kind of stick shift talk. And tonight, well, I've got my co-host on here, of course, Chuck Norris, the Canadian Chuck Norris, Rich Guido. And I'm Bankshift Billy. And tonight, Rich, why don't you introduce our guest? I'm really excited.
Well, I think it's Randy Couture's brother. I think that's why Randy Couture got into Pro Mod for a very short period of time. But no, it's Bruce Couture. Probably no relation. But welcome. Yes, and Bruce is, I don't know where you fit in the organization for Modern Driveline. Are you the owner?
I am the founder and owner of Modern Driveline for the last 28 years.
Wow.
Yeah, he's the big
awesome.
cheese. Yeah, definitely.
Big cheese.
That's right.
Well, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming on here and sharing some knowledge and telling us what you do. And
well, thanks for having me, guys.
You're welcome.
Your brain on all kinds of stuff.
So I want to pick, Rich, I want to pick your brain for a second because we were talking just a little bit before we jumped on here, but you just got your motor back together with fresh pistons and you were going to go dyno it, but you really haven't made any changes. So why are you going to dyno it again? Other than just to beat it into me, how much power?
It's more about the 3,000 drive to Florida and putting it through its paces. I hate to go all the way to Florida driving 1,900 RPM for, 3,000 miles and then put some power to it at the track and find out that there's an issue. So, and the other thing, the EGTs are getting a little warmer, so I want to put it on the dyno, put 20 pounds of boost to it, see if it'll make 16 or 1,700 horsepower and see what the EGTs do, and then see if we need to turn up, give it a little bit more timing. But it's really more of a health check than anything else. I just want to make sure it's good. Driving it all the way to Florida and breaking it in Florida just doesn't, I really don't like doing a freshen up right before a big trip like this, but it was the only window that was big enough that I could get the new pistons installed and everything done. So yeah, it's more of a health check and, a bit of a testosterone day. See how much horsepower it'll make.
And you had a bit of a mismatch of pistons in there before.
Yeah, for 2 years, it's had 7 boost pistons and 1 NA piston that had higher compression, and the ringland was sitting. You just don't tell the motor; it didn't know. And it went 828 and 74 miles an hour at 4,000 pounds, and it didn't seem to care. I had some timing pulled out of that cylinder, had some more fuel in it, but it ate that chunk of aluminum last year, so the catch can was starting to fill up a little quicker. That was really the only reason that I figured it was time to end. I put more horsepower, made more horsepower with it in 2025 than I ever had before. So
nice. All right. Well, Bruce, why don't you give us a little background on Modern Driveline? I've known you for a while because I've been a customer for, longer than I probably will admit. But, we talked quite a bit at PRI, which was awesome. But give us some of the background on Modern Driveline, how you started it and kind of where you guys are at today, SKU count, that kind of stuff. That's pretty neat. So
sure.
Go for it.
Yeah. I always say the business was born out of passion. I've been playing with cars for as long as I could utter the words and turn a wrench with friends. And so back in the 90s, I was working for a gentleman named Charlie Bruno at Charlie's Mustangs in San Jose, California. My full-time career, ironically enough, was actually in semiconductor equipment. So I had a whole another career in semiconductor for 18 years, traveling the world and working on clean room equipment, making chips. However, I decided in 2006 to retire from that industry and pursue my passion of automotive. And I started a little business called Modern Driveline in 1998 as kind of a side gig, and it was all born from wanting to do a 5-speed in my own 65 Mustang. So I really knew nothing about transmissions. You built them, taught myself. Over the time, it kind of grew, and a little thing called eBay was kind of a thing back in the day, in the Bay Area. So, started selling some parts and part of the NorCal Shelby Club for a lot of years, was past vice president and treasurer and secretary of the club. And so there was a lot of interest in high performance Fords and pretty much anything that go fast. My own 65 Mustang started life as an automatic, made it into a stick, and, worked on a lot of 5-liter Mustangs, supercharging, turbos, and guys were road racing and drag racing and just having a good time with these cars. So in 2006, we decided to move to Idaho, and we grew the business to what it pretty much is today. We've got about 16 employees in 2 different locations close to each other where we build custom transmissions and 5 and 6 speed transmission packages around the Tremec brand. So we've been selling and supporting T5s, TKOs, and now TKXs and Magnums. And I believe you had started out with a TKO with us and quickly climbed to the Magnum, and you've even gone beyond that now. But yeah, we pretty much sell everything from 1930s all the way to current hot rods, including even getting into some truck stuff now.
Wow. It seems like the T5 and the TKO, those guys would tend to be repeat customers, right?
They definitely do. There's certainly a market for for everybody. I mean, I'm still, luckily enough, I think I spoke to you about it. My blue coupe is a road race car, and I'm third owner of the car, and I know the history of the car, and it's always had a supercharger on it. And it's making 486 to the rear wheels, 465 foot-pounds of torque as a road race car. It does pretty good. I can chase the GT 350s down the track pretty healthy, and it's still sporting a T5, believe it or not.
Well, I always say, everything's fine until you get traction. Like if you start making big power and you don't get any traction, you'll be just fine with a TKO or a T5.
Yeah,
As
in
soon as
the
you put a
drag
s-
racing
yeah,
world, it's a whole nother thing. I mean,
yeah.
I'm a road racer guy, so everything's about power and finesse and carrying speed. It's not about shock load. And shock load is what kills transmissions and driveline components faster than anything.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, so you guys have 16 employees in 2 locations. Talk about like what's your typical customer and like kind of what's your target as far as who you sell to, what you sell, that kind of stuff.
A big part of our customer base really is the enthusiast, the end user. While we do have some product being sold through distribution, customers like yourself that are starting out, they're maybe having a lot of fun at their local drag strips, and or they're just on the street, they're just enthusiasts wanting to better their cars. I mean, one of the biggest changes you can make to a car is how you manage the power. I mean, people will talk about how much power they're making with an engine, but there's only certain key components of a car that can be dramatically improved, and drivetrain is one of those categories. So I can't tell you how many times customers will say, gee, I've converted a car from an automatic to a stick because they couldn't find one or they just wanted to be in control of it.
Or I would add
Another
that
part
they
of it
got
is those customers who are jobbers. We sell to a lot of folks who are building cars for others. We went through that whole overhauling all these TV programs, really brought a lot of interest to this hobby, and it brought new enthusiasm and new people. And it's those people that we are selling turnkey packages to, that with all the tech support that we do, we can sell to a guy who's just playing at the local drag strip or auto crossing, or just you know building the ultimate pro touring car.
yeah, and I would say another part of it is guys get tired of having a purse in the back seat, so they want to put a stick shift in it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's all. That's certainly part of it. So for let's just say we'll say a racer, drag and drive type deal, which is what Rich and I do, and I think a lot of people that listen do. What's one of the biggest things to consider when selecting a transmission or when making the jump to a stick shift? Like, what's that conversation look like when they're trying to pick? Because you guys have, a couple of different ones they can get.
Yeah, I mean, the go-to now is our TKX transmission on a 5-speed, and of course the Tremec Magnum, and the 6-speed double overdrive, and it has the torque capacity. I mean, right out of the box, these transmissions, for the money you're spending, you're under $3,000 on a TKX transmission that can handle easily 700 foot-pounds of torque, even on stickier tires on a heavier car. I mean, all these torque ratings are rated under a certain condition. So when we sell, a TKX to an owner, these are people maybe with, let's say, a Fox body. One of my guys is kind of campaigning an '86 convertible on the Pacific Northwest here, and Steve Gould has been, running a 363 stroker. He's got a nitrous shot on it, and he's geared it in such a way with the size tire he's running, a close ratio bot. So the TKXs do come in different ratios, but when you're doing these drag and drive kind of things, you want that fifth gear to get you to and from where you need to go. And so you're pretty much playing in the first 4 gears. So really the factor for us is, what is the crank to wheel ratio? And so people are calculating based on tire, what rear end ratio, how they want to launch it, and what kind of clutch they're going to run. Clearly, if they're in a drag and drive kind of thing, they're needing something streetable. but still something that they can punish at the track. And so your, ceramic based clutches, a lot of people are choosing twin discs for the amount of power. Clearly at your level of 1500 horsepower, you're at a whole nother level, either a triple disc or something very race oriented.
Yeah, I can tell you, I got to the point when I was running a twin disc sintered iron clutch, and it was pretty brutal on the street. Like the pedal ratio is not bad, the pressure, because I'm running the Modern Driveline linkage underneath, and it's hydraulic, so it wasn't like super heavy. But just trying to get it to engage smoothly, it just got to be an on-off switch, because as I made more power, I was having to add more and more pressure plate pressure. So I think I ended up 3,200-pound pressure plate at the end, and trying to modulate that from a dead stop on the street, it was rough. Everybody was like, "Oh, he's just learning how to drive stick today." It's like, "Yep, just out here practicing." But
I mean, what
but
you
when
guys are doing, you're at the upper level of what I would consider a streetable, a car, because you're pro shifting the transmission. You're not using synchronous, it's a synchronous system, so it's not as friendly. So you really do need to know what you're doing, and running that much power for a clutch on the street is there's always a trade-off, always.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, when I made the switch from the twin disc diaphragm setup to the adjustable slipper clutch, like, and Rich had said this for years. He's like, "Man, this is the nicest driving clutch I've had," and you're not wrong. Like, when the bass pressure's, it's full bass pressure, but it's still really light. Like, it's no big deal on the street. It squeals, but it's sintered iron, and that's what you're gonna get. But yeah, once I'm going, like, it's fine, and it's really easy to modulate from a dead stop. And of course, at the track, it's pretty nice. I like it.
We do. Yeah. Literally everything. I mean, our area of expertise is literally the back of the crank to the second U joint. So when you come to us, we spend about 15, 20 minutes kind of exchanging information to understand what you are doing with your car. So people say, come to me automatically and go, how much? And I go, well, I can't tell you how much until I understand what we're building. It's like building a home. Are we putting tile or carpeting in? When you're dealing with a car, how much power, how are you going to use it? And so at the end of the day, we give you a complete kit. And, and it's not just also switching something from an automatic. A lot of times guys are coming to us maybe with old 4-speeds. Maybe they're running an 80s Camaro or something, and they're putting an LS in. And so now they're wanting to put an entirely new drivetrain in. And maybe it was a stick car before. How do you make that conversion? How do you keep it simple? In some cases, you're just taking a top loader or a Muncie 4-speed out, putting in a 5-speed, bolts right up to an existing bell housing, makes it really easy and sweet. So every situation is different. So, when we have customers contact us, we really do want to know everything that you're planning to do now and into the future, so that you don't outgrow the parts you're buying today.
Yeah, and I've got my co-pilot, my buddy Jamie. He's in contact with you guys, doing exactly the same thing. He's got a 71 Mach 1 Mustang Windsor power plant in it, and he has a T5 in it, and he's switching over to a TKX, but he's doing the whole everything, clutch pedal, drive, everything with you guys, and so far it's been pretty painless.
Yeah, you mentioned 71 Mustang, and for those that don't know, we've been doing a lot of hydraulic conversions for decades. We started with our Lightfoot series, which was what you started with, Bill, and now we're in the last 2 years have introduced our Stealth series. And what that is building a hydraulic system that is built into the dash area, so it's completely out of the way of the engine compartment for those who are running big engine, small spaces. We recently introduced the 71, 73 Mustang hydraulic system, where the cylinder's mounted up underneath the dash, and the pedal looks original but has a multiple ratio aspect to it. So if you are at the drag strip and want to tune some of that drivability, you literally move a peg or a bolt on the pedal. It was super easy. And so you say, hey, I want to drive it this way on the street, but maybe you get to the drag strip, you move the bolt up to the fast ratio so you can get a quick release. So that's the versatility of the new Stealth series.
Nice. So what about, we had a couple of questions from some listeners, and what about setups for oddball swaps? Like, specifically, some guy asked a TKX into an 7, which I'm assuming then they're looking to replace that. What's that 5-speed that comes in those?
Well, depends on the year. It probably would have been a T45 or a 3650 5-speed.
Yeah, what's that? Is it the MT85 or something?
Oh, yeah, that's right. You're talking about I was thinking of the SN95. You're actually speaking of the next generation S1.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the MT82 is problematic as most have discovered. The Magnum XL is the unit go to. It's direct shifted, a lot more torque capacity, and of course, better gearing.
And what about the TKX? I think his comment was it saves 40 pounds over the Magnum, which I'm a big fan of saving weight where I can.
The only drawback is that the TKX was not designed to be a replacement to the semi-remote shifter that's currently in that car. So layout of the shifter is what you have to overcome. Can it be done? Yes, there are some shifters that extend off of tail shaft housing to make that happen, and it can be adapted to the engine. Do we offer a package for that? We don't get a lot of requests to do a 5-speed, but we're not out of the realm of looking at it and saying, yeah, we can put something together. Is there going to be some what I would call end user hot rodding? Yeah, there will be, because I don't have a full on package for that.
Okay, nice. And talk to me about the difference in power holding, or maybe just bring us up to speed on the TKX. Kind of the precursor to that was the TKO, which Rich and I had, and he broke a lot more of them than I did. But the TKX is it's pretty robust. Like, talk to me about that. Kind of
Yeah, the
what changed.
TKX was a pretty big leap forward, something that we were really looking forward to seeing. And when it came out, I guess now or was during COVID, so it had been 4 years ago. End loading design, the cases, and if you're familiar with top loader designs, the main shaft comes in from the top of the unit. So naturally, there's a square box, and the case itself is not as strong. And when they came out with the TKX, it being that it's an end loading, the tail's coming off on the back, the main case is coming in from the front, and there's a main support plate. So the design was to keep the bearings and the gears tight, and so everything had more torque capacity, and you still make the footprint smaller. Internally, a lot of the technology that was used is borrowed from the Magnum and the TR platform. The triple cone synchronizers, the gear center, the width of the gear, and the whole synchronization of it. So it was really a kind of a leap forward. The TKO that we had was still kind of had its roots or feet into the top loaders, single cone synchronizer, just didn't synchronize at high RPMs or high loads very well. And again, that whole main case kind of thing, it allowed it to under loads it kind of wanted to leak. The lower cluster front bearing was not screwed in or supported by a shoulder like the TKO 500 was. The TKO 600 100% relied on the bell housing to keep that race in place. Not something that I was in favor of. And Greg Liberty from Liberty High Performance had almost an immediate solution to that, and was to screw in a support cap to anchor that. And to me, that should have just been done right from the beginning. So while the name sounds sort of familiar, TKO being the knockout and the TKX being the next generation is where the marketing comes from on that vastly different architecture. People think, oh, it's just an upgraded TKO. I think the bearing retainer in the transmission is the only part in the entire thing. Oh, excuse me, the input shaft seal and maybe the output seal. Other than that, the interior of that transmission is vastly different. So the performance is definitely much improved. We're seeing a lot of great things with it. On the TKOs, they were 6.4s, and they reduced it down to 6.8 on the 297 gear ratio. So these boxes have a fixed cluster in them. So you have to pick either a 287 to 1 first gear, or you're looking at a 327 to 1 first gear. And by doing that, the headset tooth count dictates what your cluster is moving at, so your overdrive is going to be affected. So 287 first gear comes either as a 6.8 or an 8.1 or 19%, and then your 327 only comes as a 0.72 to 1 ratio overdrive.
So the deepest.
I really liked it that they did reduce the overdrive by 4% over the TKO, because I had some people, the cam overlaps and the carburation on big port engines. It just didn't like loping quite so low. So people were always saying, hey, is there a 7.2, 7.3 ratio available? And I go, no. So to me, having the 0.68 or a 32% reduction keeps your RPMs between gears at a pretty even kilt. If you look at most of it, it's 25, 30% between gears. So having the 0.64 overdrive really kind of stretched it a little too far. If somebody's wanting that high and low, you look to a Magnum to solve that.
Well, or you could just tell them to drive faster and then they get out of that overlap, right? I mean, 55, stay alive.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when we look, the Fords tend to be the more challenging of the bunch. Chryslers by far are more challenging. But in the scheme of what we deal with mostly, Ford and Chevy, when it comes to Fords trying to stick like a TKX into a 65 Mustang or a Falcon or even early Fairlanes, the tunnels are really small. You have to make more room for them. And that's where the T5 been addressing those cars for people with, what I call street power. But those that are making serious power, yeah, you make a little room. But I can tell you that the TKX size kind of rivals the T5. And so on our website, we have a CAD overlay that shows the blue and green areas where the two transmissions are smaller and larger in their respective areas. So to get the footprint that we're dealing with on the TKX and the power that it can handle of the Magnum kind of level, that's saying a lot. We can put a TKX into a lot of different things. I'll give you an extreme case of that. And that is that I've been able to squeeze a TKX into a Sunbeam Tiger. I mean, those cars are extremely tight. I mean, they originally weren't supposed to have a V8 and a top loader, and here we are stuffing, stroked motors and a TKX into a car. There's a guy, I forget his name, but he had like a twin turbo Sunbeam Tiger, and he was just spanking people on the street. And these guys were so embarrassed that they would just keep driving and wouldn't even come back. So yeah, we do have it figured out. And a lot of cars, the TKX is a bolt-in solution. Some of the cases like, 64 through, let's say, 67 Chevelles, we have to do a shifter off to the side to make the shifter come out through the original location. And it's able to fit the tunnel. Now, the key to success with that is the body mounts. If you're on a full frame car like yours, Bill, the body mounts will settle over time, and people forget this and they think, well, my top loader fits or whatever fits. And I'm like, yeah, that's great, but you don't realize you've lost somewhere in there about a half inch of clearance. We had a car here in the shop, and we couldn't get the TKX to fit. And I said, well, the body mounts are original. And we put new body mounts in, and lo and behold, we had clearance. So when you do have a full frame car with mounts, best to put mounts in the car.
Yeah, that's interesting. Huh. Yeah, I guess all that stuff settles over time, right?
A Corvette, same thing, cold flowing of fiberglass, but also that relationship. So it's a compounding problem. So yeah, when we literally have about 97 different variations of TKXs currently to accommodate different shift positions, whether it's a street rod to a truck to a, like you say, Corvette, Sunbeam, Tiger, Fairlane. We're trying to make the shifters go in exactly the right location. So it's not just what gear ratios and how much torque, but guys are really wanting to put this stuff in. If they've got a 428 Cobra Jet and they really don't want to carve this car up, we turn and we say, okay, what do we do to make the transmission fit the chassis and not the other way around? So we look at many different factors when we talk to customers and say, we've honed our craft by either machining something off the case or building a special shifter. And then if there's ways of upgrading the transmission internally, we have historically done that. The TKX really doesn't need a whole lot of modifications right out of the box. I know there's been a lot of discussion about cryoing of gears as an example. I'm not really a big fan of cryoing, but I am a fan of the microlighting or polishing of the gears. I do believe that is a great benefit.
Nice. What was I going to ask you? I don't remember. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, I just want to touch maybe on something because I hear this term used a lot, T56 Magnum. It's either a T56, which is a previous generation, or a Magnum. I know even I catch my staff saying it as well, where somebody says T56 Magnum, and they really are two different things. It's sort of like the difference between a T56 and a TR6060. The Magnum is actually architecturally, internally, a TR6060 first, and then it was adapted to fit the aftermarket. And while we have the look and feel of it from an installation standpoint, feels like an LST56 as an example, but the Magnum literally internally, there's almost no commonality other than how it interfaces to the environment. And going back to your question, like on your Trans Am, the beauty is that we can make either one fit. Does the TKX fit better? Sure, because it's more in line with what the four speed would have been. There's really no modifications. Can a Magnum fit that chassis? It can. It's tight in two locations, one towards the front of the case and a little bit around the shifter. But even like a car like yours, we do offer the offset shifter to put the stub through that original location. So we always say to customers, well, why is it you're looking to do one versus the other? You kind of hinted you're leaning more to the TKX. The advantage really for the TKX is, yes, it's lighter. It still has a lot of capacity to the transmission. And if you don't need a double overdrive, you are carrying extra weight. And in most people, they're playing in the first four gears, and then they usually just stuff it in overdrive and they're getting to and from somewhere, and it's usually good enough. And if they're running, as an example, 373 is probably by far the most popular gear on a 26-inch tall tire. If you grow that tire by an inch, let's say 27, 28s, and as you approach 29s and 30s, you're immediately into that 410, 430 gear ratio to compensate to keep your drive shaft revolutions per mile in the ballpark. So if you're building a car and you're trying to do like everything, you want to go autocrossing, you want to drive it to, various car show events, Magnum can be a benefit if you're running those deep gears and you're still playing in the first four at the drag strip. But maybe around town you want a little more overdrive, but on the highway you really want to get that RPM down because it's a long haul between Alberta and, let's say, Florida. You want to look like something that looks like gas mileage.
I
But either
I
one are a
remember.
great choice.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to ask. So, do you guys make your own shifters? You said you have a bunch of different shifters with offsets. Do you make your own shifters too?
We do build our own line of shifters, but we have been using and private labeling Red Roberts shifters for a number of years. He makes the quick stick, and we've been supportive of Red. I've been working with Red for several decades now, and he has a nice rebuildable shifter where it has a spherical bearing and Belleville washers, so it snaps from the second to third gear. Really simple and really compact. That's one of the nice features about it. You can take the shifter apart and clean it, and if it ever wears out, replace the components for the dollars that you're spending. It's a pretty good value.
He actually used to run. I used to run one of those, and I loved it. It was great. I did have some wear issues because the plate was aluminum where the thing was, but we're
There's
doing
been
stuff a
some
little bit
revisual
more aggressive
changes
with
through
it.
the years. Yeah, and if you're
Yeah.
really hammering it hard, that's it, it is tough. The more offset you have in the shifter, that's why we tend to limit them to about a 2.5-inch offset. The more offset you put in it, the more stresses you're going to put on the internals.
Yeah, but
No, I did have the fortune to see him at SEMA this year, and yes, Red, he's got to be in his 80s now. I've known Red since I started 28 years ago. He kind of mentored me a little bit in this business, and I have a great deal of respect for him. He's very passionate about this industry. Clearly, was the founder of McLeod, and is an interesting side story. I asked him, I said, "How'd you come up with the name McLeod? I mean, Roberts is not McLeod," and he goes, "Yeah, I had a girlfriend with the last name McLeod, so I named it after her." I said, "Does your wife know that?" She goes, "Oh yeah, oh yeah."
and that's not his wife. I'm guessing.
No, unfortunately, Red lost his wife this last year.
It sucks.
I wish we had more Red Roberts in the world. I mean, he's an honest man, very sharing of his information. I mean, I don't think that we're seeing that in this industry as we used to. We actually don't build the drive shafts in-house. We do turn to key people in this industry. Inland Empire is a company that we have been using for quite some time. They have they do a lot of their own fabrication, including their own yokes. So they've been doing drag racing a long time, Bonneville speed, anything where the requirements are high. Historically, we used to offer QA1 carbon fiber drive shafts until they got recently out of the business. And we also offer aluminum for those that are looking for lightweight. But in the drag racing world, it's all about strength. So yes, chrome moly and using billet yokes and the proper size U joints.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Rich and I both run aluminum. Actually, we have the same drive shafts now with is it the 7073 Mark Williams? Is that what you have now, Rich? Yeah, it's the bonded. And it's bonded. It's bonded, not even welded, which is interesting. But I've been running a
Bonded?
bonded. Yeah, I've been running a bonded one, well, for a lot of years. One down from that, and then when I broke the straps on it, which is no fault of the drive shaft, I switched over to the 7073 because they informed me that the other one was only rated for 900 horse or something, and I was like, "Oh, well, we're a little over that." So that's what I have in there now, and it's, like, noticeably smoother, so there must have been some issues with the other one, but yeah, it's bonded. It's, like, glued together. It's pretty interesting, but no issue.
Mm,
So, Mark Williams, they have a pretty good idea what's going on. I think they made a couple of drive shafts before.
yeah, yeah. No, they've been doing it a long time. I don't deal with them directly, but I do buy some of their components.
Yeah. Yeah, nice.
We don't typically get too many because we've already done a pretty good job of preempting customers of what they should be looking for. But it is a area than the tech line. A lot of times we get folks that are saying, "Hey, I'm experiencing a vibration." You have to check several things. Obviously, the basic runouts, and did they? I had a friend of mine who does Bonneville, and he had a one-piece drive shaft, and he was experiencing a vibration at 175 miles an hour. And he was trying to push his way up into the 200s, but it was so violent. And he's like, well, it wasn't always that way. And what he discovered with the drive shaft, even though on paper it looked good as far as lengths and in sizes and everything, at some point during one of the runs he must have done some damage where the drive shaft became slightly twisted, or it was jump roping essentially. And at speed, you have what they call half critical and critical speeds. And clearly he was driving through some of that, but then he was reaching critical speeds. And we finally came to the conclusion that we couldn't even run a carbon fiber drive shaft for him, because even then it was still kind of on the edge because it was a pickup truck and the length of the drive shaft was a fact. So we came to the conclusion that he would need a two-piece drive shaft with a carrier bearing. And we came up with a solution, did everything that we needed. And this last year, I helped him with his truck. It's called the Sultanator, and he had managed to break a record in his class. He's running a Coyote with a big fat turbo and a Magnum 6-speed and an S10 pickup truck. And why
I
did an
like it.
S10 pickup? Because Banks had already done, Gail Banks did a complete analysis, aerodynamics on that. Yeah, vibration can be a number of things. Drive angles for one, where the motor's sitting and the pinion angle of your differential. And for those that are running leaf spring, there's, axle wrap up to consider. How much is that, and whether you're limiting it or if you're running on a 4-link system. Most of the time, most customers you're trying to reuse their old equipment. And that's when they can get into trouble depending on who's modifying their drive shafts. In this day and age, we have such great technology that the cost savings really isn't there. Build a new drive shaft, start with new materials. Don't work with something that has been possibly compromised. If it's been dinged or banged, you can't straighten these things out. You're just chasing it. Buy the good stuff. You've already spent good money buying the transmission. Why skimp on a drive shaft? Because if that thing comes apart, it's a bad day.
Really bad day. Yeah, definitely. So, Bruce, tell us either some horror stories or some hilarious stories from customers or just stuff that you've done. Because I know you have, it's probably, the well is deep for that.
The well is definitely deep. In the realms of this conversation, even though it's not really drag racing, I had a guy with a Galaxy. He was in Montana, and he said to me that he wanted a Magnum with a very high ratio, like 0.5 final ratio. And he said, I'm going to run like some 280 rear end ratio gears. I'm like a 28-inch tall tire. And I'm like, you're out of your mind. And I says, I want to go 80 miles an hour, like at 1,500 RPM. I'm like, and you're running what for an engine? He goes, oh, I got a 460. And he says, I'm planning on running it like a diesel. I sold the kit to him, and he was the engineer type. And I said, have at it kind of thing. But that was kind of unusual. On a different extreme, we did a job many years ago. A great friend of mine, Mark Kirby, he was known for doing flatheads. I met Mark through a mutual customer, and he was out of Detroit, and he did flatheads, and they were going after an all aluminum block. And so I got to know the guys over at Shadow Rods. Well, it turns out that John Hall, who is the owner of a company, has a small company that he does. It's called Glass Tender, and they do all the restaurants for refrigeration and cleaning and so forth. So when I start showing up, it says you arrived, and I'm at this glass tender place, and in the corner is this hot rodding shop, and they were literally machining an all aluminum flathead block. So John
Wow.
has spent stupid amount of time and money pursuing this, but it's clearly a passion. And it was neat to be able to see their facility. And unfortunately, we've lost Mark. But when here was another diehard enthusiast in the true sense of to me the roots of hot rodding and where a lot of us can pay homage to. And I had the great fortune one year to work with Mark, and we developed one of my front shift T5s behind it, and we had an adapter, and we built a Kevlar clutch for it. And Mark said, "Hey, why don't you come to Detroit with me?" From Columbus, Ohio. I was at a Good Guys show, and we got into this 34 Ford with suicide doors on. If you ever been in a true 34, and he had special latches with alarms so that we knew the latches were closed at 80 miles an hour. If a door came open, it's a bad day.
Suicide.
So
There's a reason they call
Mark
it suicide
had
door.
me drive the car all the way up to Ohio where he lived, from Columbus up to Detroit. And we came to a dead stop one day, and he goes, "Put it in fourth gear." Now, mind you, he's running 410 gears on a 30-inch tall tire. He says, "I want you to take off in fourth gear from a dead stop." Yes. I looked at him, I'm like, you sure? Oh, yeah. You talk about RPMs. I let the clutch out and obviously modulated the throttle. And I watched the tach go to 400 RPMs. And the car just pulled away from the curb, and I finally was getting into an on ramp, and I was still in fourth gear, and the motor was turning over 6,000 RPMs. Now for a flathead, that is zinging. In fact, Mark finally goes, "You can shift now." So here we are going down the highway in a 34 with these big Dumbo fenders, and just cruising effortlessly down the road with an aluminum flathead. Mark would tell me stories about how he would do rolling starts against small block Chevys, and he would win every time with that flathead. Pretty
Interesting.
impressive stuff. So, in this industry, I never know who I'm going to deal with. One time I was dealing with uh, Bill Elliott, who called the shop one day. I didn't, at first you're just talking to him, and I say, "Hey, you got the same name as a famous race car driver," and he goes, "Yeah, I am that famous race car driver." And so again, you just never know who's on the line, who's doing what. And at the end of the day, we all put our pants on the same way and having a good time, building street rods and having fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I mean, those aluminum flatheads with the supercharger on it, I think they were making, 350 horsepower and equal amount of torque. And the torque comes on really low.
Huh. Well, 400 low.
Well, there was one day that, and Mark was driving, he pulled out the driveway and he backed it up in a typical hot rod fashion, stuck it second gear, stuffed it, and then he was just doing, a big old nasty burnout and, caught third gear and just kept on going, and, again, typical hot rodder.
Nice. Nice. Too funny. I don't have any more questions unless we want to jump into the TKO round, Rich. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the history, if you look at the history of most transmissions, you can there is literally a history when it comes to bolt patterns and where things start. And really the Magnum gets its benefits or beginnings from the very early T56s. And in the GM side, the bolt pattern in the front of the case is the same. Now, when you start getting into what I call traditional T56s, the ones that started it all of this stuff was designed for OEMs in mind. And so a Chevy model and a Ford model, even though they shared the same bolt pattern, the input shafts were different, depending on the needs, whether it was a Chevy or a Viper, all of them are different. Over the years, people like Red Roberts and us back in the day, we would typically adapt a T56 bell housing to mate. GM, LS, and a Viper have very similar input shaft lengths, so you can interchange those fairly easily, but Ford was different. Fast forward to the TR6060, those are the OEM side of the business. So any of the TR6060s, which first came out in a GT5 in 2007, that unit is completely different than, let's say, a TR6060 that you see today, let's say in a Camaro or a CTSV or even some of the Hellcats when they were offered. So to try to take a TR6060, some of them have an integral bell housing, like the Mustang stuff had an integral bell. So there was no way of adapting short of ripping the front plate off. And even internally, the bearing sizes were different. So you can't easily just say, hey, I'm going to grab this part and put it on that. You kind of have to know what you're doing and understand what revision those transmissions went under. And that's really where the Magnum shines. Tremec has been making the Magnum shortly after, about 2008, I think it was when it was introduced. The Magnum was really the upgrade because people like D&D and several other companies, including guys over at Liberty, and we were trying to take Viper spec T56s in the day because it was the strongest gear set that was available. And so there was a lot of modifications and things that companies like us were doing. Well, the beauty of having the new TKX is that we're not doing a lot of upgrades because the box right out of the factory is pretty good, and the Magnum is using all the best parts that Tremec can put together from an aftermarket standpoint by leaving the front plate on so that you can bolt a quick time bell housing to it. And of course, each one is clocked a little different. The depths are different. But in the nutshell, what Tremec is doing now is a Ford-based modular, like an 0304 Cobra spec T56. They carried that into the Magnum. When they built the Magnum on the GM side, they mimicked it after the LS-based T56. So the input shafts and the configuration of how the throwout bearing goes on the front is all modeled after that. Now, from there, having companies like QuickTime, you can adapt these transmissions to a Dodge or to some other application, an AMC for that matter. Now, these bell housings, of course, have gotten kind of expensive over the years, but it's a great solution to have something stable that you're not trying to put an adapter or a spacer plate or swapping shafts. It really has simplified that process.
Yeah, I know. When I first started with the T56 Magnum, there was a fairly significant front cover difference between the Ford version and the GM version, because it had like the guide tube for a hydraulic throwout bearing. It pressed in from the back, whereas the GM one bolted on the front. And obviously the input shafts were different, the ID and the length and everything. Pretty much have switched over to the GM style where everything just bolts on from the front. It seems to be, I prefer that. I don't have issues with leakage or anything like that.
You brought up some things, and over time, you get some discovery, like the guide tube you spoke of on the Ford, whether it's a T56 or the Magnum, they both share that same feature. When we do let's say, a release bearing, we know that we can't press on that guide to put the load on it. And you'll see some companies, internal hydraulic release bearings, they don't pay attention to that detail. One of the very first things we did was we put a spacer or a ring on there to disperse that load onto the casting. So we're never pushing on the tube itself. So the load goes directly onto that front case. And to your point, we've used a number of internal release bearings. The ones that we like the most are the Tilton 6000 series bearings. Tilton has done a great job with that bearing. And we actually had a lot to help with co-developing and making that 6000 series marketable, but it has a anti-rotational tab on it. So there's a feature in the Ford box on the Magnum where you can actually drill or put the pin in to keep that locked So whether you're doing a GM or a Ford, from a mechanical standpoint, they're basically the same. I understand what you're saying is they have that machine feature. I've always said to Tremec, why do you not machine that case? Because the casting piece of it is there. You just have to machine that feature in. If they were to do both interchangeably, it would give the customer a choice of saying, I'm just going to alleviate that guide tube and bolt something direct on. But they keep it pretty simple.
Well, and I will say that, Rich and I both run the Tick billet front cover with the spray bar and stuff, and they've even upgraded that now with its own internal pump, which is like, I don't know which T56, the Corvette model had the pump in there and stuff. But
It's
that thing
optional in the
is,
Magnum. People don't realize that if you look at the casting, you can see where it's machined. Again, this technology comes from the TR6060 platform, where if you're buying what they call a track pack option for, let's say, a Shelby, it comes with an internal pump. It's actually driven off of the lower cluster. So you can have a mechanical pump and there's an in and an out. These Magnums are just not machined from Tremec that way. So dealers like ourselves are machining those front cases to do that. But yes, having a spray bar definitely helps with lubrication and keeping, well, there is some cooling effect.
yeah.
So the deal there is, again, these were modeled after OEM applications. So I'll give you an extreme case of this. If you were to look at these Camaro, let's say a T5, they rotated that transmission, I think it was 17 degrees counterclockwise. Again, I'm picking an extreme case. It's all done for ergonomics. The whole idea is they want the shift box not to be straight. They want it at a tilt. So when you grab a hold of the shift lever, if you ever naturally release your arms, your hands roll in. Nobody sits in a chair with their hand straight up. It naturally rolls over. So in the Chevy and Ford, many of these other companies, they're rotating that shift box over so that when you're shifting it, it feels natural. And so that mount has to be flat while the transmission is rotated 5 degrees, 6 degrees, clockwise, counterclockwise. I was working with Ross McCombs during that time. And yeah, those were the details that I would feed back to him. When I did work with Ross, in the day, it was nice to be able to work with somebody who had a like mindset. And there'd be a lot of times we'll be on a phone and we'd be brainstorming something and he would go back and he would change or make, or, we'd come up with an idea and 4 weeks later there was a bellhousing out. So it was nice to have that. And of course, now the bellhousing is owned and manufactured under the Holley name. So, that kind of grassroots innovation is not the same. So yes, in the early days, there was an assumption that the pattern was straight. Well, with their bellhousing, the beauty is that you fixture it and you weld it on the way it's supposed to. And yeah, you can put a rotation or change the depth of it quite easily. So when QuickTime came onto the market, it was for us in the conversion business, it was a game changer. It really made our jobs a lot easier. That's probably a topic that I'd like to touch on, and that is bellhousing alignment. People seem to dismiss that. And it's really an important topic when you're dealing with an engine and a transmission. Anytime you have two shafts, you want to make sure that they're concentric with each other. And people go like, well, if it slips in, send it. And I'm like, not so much. If you're dealing with high loads and high RPMs, that is critical. And, you really do want to check it. People will say, well, it's the bellhousing or it's this or that. And I'm like, well, it's a tolerance stack up, what they call allowable tolerances. And when they, like QuickTime, when they make their bellhousings, they actually check that every time they manufacture those bellhousings. And people say, well, an OEM one is better than the aftermarket. And I go, well, is it? At the end of the day, if a manufacturer has an allowable tolerance of 2000s, let's say, which is reasonable, right? And let's say the engine has got an allowable tolerance of 2 or 3,000s. Well, if you have a tolerance stack and they're both stacked in the same direction, now you're 5, 6,000s out of center. And who do you blame? Well, you don't blame anybody. It's just a manufacturer's tolerance stack. And people seem to quickly disregard that there's a possibility that the block may have been out of spec. Well, when you rebuild an engine, does anybody ever go back to the line bore of the crank and double check the pins in the block? Not many. And I can tell you that they can be 20 and 30 thousandths out of center. And so that's when you start getting into alignment dowels and having to correct for it.
Yeah. And I can say, I mean, I've I've learned and always check on a new fresh setup alignment of the bell housing. I had the tool you can slide in. I also done it with the dial indicator. But my experience has been if you're dealing with a new motor, a new block that hasn't been, the caps haven't been resurfaced and the line bore hasn't been adjusted, I've never had to use offset dowels. But in the case
which is a good thing.
where that has been done, almost every time I have to use an offset dowel because guess what? The crank is no longer in the same position that it was. I know it's a few thou, but the Tremex spec is 5,000s, and I like to target less than that if possible. But yeah,
You say Tremec spec, as you indicated, it's a spec that, how far do you really want to be out, whether it's a 3-speed, 4-speed, 6-speed, it really doesn't matter. If you really want to be at 0, that's where you want to be.
yeah, yep, yep. And it's worth checking.
Well, the beauty is that the industry has answered that question by having what they call adjustable offset dowels. It's a double cam design. If you can actually cam the pin so it's 0, and if you keep clocking it, it grows with an offset. And then you can change the orientation. So there are pins on the marketplace that are not fixed ground offset, they're adjustable. And that's kind of a neat concept. Yep.
Yeah, so many solutions, so many solutions.
So, Bill, you and I were at the PRI show. Let's talk about PRI a little bit, since a lot of enthusiasts either like to be at the show or a lot of products are developed from that. Now, obviously, I sell and develop a lot of hydraulics, and you and I got to talking about a little about what you do, and I was just as fascinated with what you're doing with the launch control and the slip control of your unit. And I gave that some more thought, and I've been speaking to our clients about it and saying how a product like that is really helping the stick guys compete faster and more consistent. And have you spoken about our visit to PRI and a partnership between our products?
Yeah, not on the podcast really, but anybody that I've done a drag and drive with knows that I have a giant Modern Driveline sticker on both sides of my trailer, right in the middle. It's pretty good real estate. And you guys have always been very, very helpful for me. Granted, I'm not running like a stock T56 Magnum setup anymore, but there's still parts in there that are interchangeable, bearings,
Oh, yeah.
seals, all that kind of stuff. And I usually deal with, I know you have a couple of Pauls that work with you, but the one that's probably been there the longest is the one that I like to deal
Paul
with the
Coffee,
most.
yeah.
Yes, Paul Coffee. But I don't get him on the phone much anymore because I don't think he does that end anymore.
No, he's more in the engineering side of things.
Yeah, but you guys have been crucial for me from the very beginning because I got my first TKO 600 setup from you guys. And then when I moved to the T56 Magnum, I did order right from Liberty. I got a faceplated one right out of the gate, but other parts came from you guys. You turned me on to the Tilton 6000 series throwout bearing, and I ran that on the TKO and on the T56 Magnum until I switched over to the Tick one that pulls the throwout bearing back with the adjustable clutch when you're not on the pedal. So it's clear of the fingers. And that's been fantastic too. But yeah, I always tell people if they're asking, like, uh, I don't know why you would mess with the fork and the slave cylinder and all that stuff. Cause that 6000 series is just, it's the cat's meow. I mean, that thing is so nice. And I always think too, that's what they run in NASCAR. And if it's not really, really good, I don't believe NASCAR would be running it. So,
It's like anything. People in the industry, if they don't know, they don't know. But in release bearings, when it comes to quality, you usually get what you pay for. And if
yeah.
people do their research correctly and see how the Tilton bearing is designed with the seal behind the piston, the whole concept, people think, oh, internal release bearings are a pain, they're prone to failure. Well, you probably have had experiences with a lesser quality bearing, but these Tilton bearings being a billet design and the seals being what they are, rarely do we ever have any problems with the bearings. Most of the times when we have seen problems, very few defective pieces, and I have to say Tilton's been fantastic about either repairing them or replacing them. I'm not going to mention names on this podcast, but there are companies that are well known where they fail in a very short period of time, and that's the bad taste that people leave in their mouth, thinking they're all bad. They're all getting a bad rap, but I can't say that's the case. I'm like you. I have a Tilton 6000 series in my '88 Mustang GT with the Magnum in it, and it's been robust. I don't have to worry about whether it sits 6 months or I use it at the drag strip. It's going to perform. Some of the other bearings, you have to be concerned if they sit for 6 months, they'll go dry, and then the first time you use them, they blow out.
Yeah, and I can say confidently, I bet you I have close to, God, if it's not 100,000 miles, it's probably close to running those bearings, and I never once have had an issue. I bought a reseal kit and all the stuff to fix it at the track, but, I never had an issue ever. I
Right.
did reseal it once just because I thought I should, but honestly probably didn't need to. I've never ever had an issue. I'd wear out the bearing itself, but never the components and the actual release, the hydraulic portion of it. It was never a problem. It was just, again, it's what you get what you pay for. And I love it. And I see this all the time. People want to save a couple bucks. They buy the cheaper one and then it breaks. Well, even buying another cheaper one, now you've bought two of them. You spent more than you would have if you just bought the good one right out of the gate.
Well, if you're on the road like you guys are, doing these drag and drives, or even if I'm at an open track event, you've taken time off from a busy schedule. You've spent money getting to the event. You spent money on the event. Why would you cheap out? Miles will buy the good parts, as
Yeah.
we say sometimes, buy once, cry once,
Try
and
once.
you just move forward. You forget about it, but you won't forget about it when it fails at the most critical times. As we went into our Stealth Series hydraulics, we wanted to be where you could punish it as much as you wanted to. So if you want to go out there and hammer the thing, you could. So we wanted to pair up our hydraulics. We don't do internal release bearings because why should I? Tilton makes a great one. And like I said, we helped bring that particular model to market. And because prior to that, they were making what they call a 600 series, and it was a bolt-on style. And we wanted a slip-on model, and we wanted to be a little shorter for tight applications. So we talked to them about it and said, here are the things that we would improve and change. And we haven't looked back since. We've sold thousands of those bearings with great performance. It gives you good pedal effort and control. You can easily bleed it, and it's easily adjustable, infinitely adjustable. Some of these other kits, you're shimming, and so you're either too far in or too far out. You can literally adjust this thing to a thousandth of an inch.
Yeah, because it's got the threaded collar on it. Yeah, and that's pretty awesome. One thing you didn't mention is you have the under dash hydraulics, and you guys are making those for lots of different cars. But who is actually building those for you? Because when you told me that, I was like, whoa.
Well, we were building the hydraulics, for it, but the cylinder is engineered to our specifications from Tilton Engineering. So they are the ones building our slave. They actually also make our private label to our design, our external slave cylinder for those who are doing 4-speeds. So if you actually look at the cylinder, it has their insignia on it. Do we openly say, hey, it's a Tilton kit? No. For years, we were selling our Lightfoot series, and it always had the Willwood cylinder, on there. And so people would call Willwood saying, hey, I want one of these kits. And they like, no, you need to contact Modern Driveline. So yeah, we are taking components, but what we had Tilton build for us in our Stealth series was really a game changer in how we went to market with it. We wanted a known high quality cylinder as being the heart of our kit. Once we designed it and built it the way we wanted to, we then started building all these application kits. Currently, we have all the Mustangs done. We're working our way through all of the Camaros and Chevelles and Tri-5s and C10s, and we'll be continuing. I think we got some BOPs that are out or soon to be out, but we're continuing to build on that platform because when you can build it where you're maintaining the original pivot point of the pedal without altering it in some cases. I won't mention the competitor, but they're altering sometimes that pivot point, and so then you get a pedal that wants to swing up, not swing naturally to the floor. And then we wanted to add new features, that adjustable ratio as an example. We also had the freedom of moving the cylinder in different orientations, as you saw in some of my displays at Pier 6970 Mustang. The cylinder is actually vertical. You don't see too many hydraulic systems that are mounted inside the dash that have that freedom. And in our design, we try to utilize the original OEM spring location. We're trying not to compete with other components. We try to work in harmony with the space that we have, but still maintain the natural arc, because when we do the design of the hydraulic system, We want to make sure that it gives you the proper feel, not just the top, not just at the bottom, but how does it modulate from the bottom where it's, you're more concerned about how it's modulating, and then how does it cam over and come up quick, to engage that clutch. And then nobody in the industry, again, we came out with hydraulics with a Lightfoot series where we were doing the linkage reduction. We were the first to come up with application specific kits. I remember starting in this industry 28 years ago, and they were kits you would buy from Willwood or McLeod or Tilton, and these are what I would call a universal kit. They give you some guidelines of as to how to install it, attach it to the pedal, and then most people were trying to go through the original clutch rod hole, and a lot of times they were just, oh, I'll drill a hole here, and they had no concept of what they were doing. So as we started engineering and getting into this, we wanted to make sure that we were maintaining when you think about it, it's about a 12-to-1 ratio. The pedal moves 6 inches on the swing for roughly half an inch of bearing movement on the throwout bearing. So if you start altering that aggressively, you end up with a pedal that's either too heavy, won't release the clutch. People have chosen the wrong bore and stroke size. So we engineer the kit so that we are maximizing all the mechanical and hydraulic advantages. And we do a lot of CAD simulation where we're actually showing how much it's moving at any given time and where the stresses are. So we know that our Stealth series, as an example, can take a lot of punishment for a lot of years because we know the quality of the cylinder. We know we've got, the cylinders being supported by the ends like a shock. So there's no binding going on at any given point because we're not holding the body and hoping to get the rod to line up correctly. So it was a radically different approach to doing that. And then we said, well, what limits us in the ratio? Nothing. We can move that ratio around to tune it. And then the other feature we did was, how do we seal? How do we, somebody takes an inch and a quarter hole that's in the firewall that's now from a 4-speed car. Well, it's a natural place to run the line through, but how do you seal up 2 lines? You're going to put some foam in there and bubble gum and put it together? No, we came up with a bulkhead. You would do that in a race car anyway. So we took that race car mentality and said, let's make a plate with an O-ring on it, and we can flip it to whether somebody wants a stainless steel look or an aluminum look, and we just make it so that it's sandwiched, and we run a bulkhead through it. All the lines are purposely designed to fit that application. And at the end of the day, the only thing you're seeing is a reservoir on the outside of the firewall and a line going down to the slave cylinder, whether it be internal or external. But so often in this hydraulic market, people are talking bore size, and it's really about volume displacement. If I asked you to go down to Home Depot and buy a 2x, you'd be scratching your head going, 2x what? And the hydraulics is the same thing. If I told you to buy a 3/4 inch, okay, I didn't give you all the information you needed, because in our systems, we know the stroke, we know the bore, but ultimately we know that the amount of fluid going down to the slave cylinder has to make the throwout bearing expand. Now, a lot of people don't give the slave cylinder a lot of thought. If I compare the volume requirements for a Tilton and one for, let's say, a Ram or a McLeod, they're all different, and they're going to give you different displacements, or I should say movement of the bearing for the same amount of fluid going in. So again, it's an engineered system, and people just love to grab an OEM bearing something and a master cylinder. They think they can put it together, and some of it's a known entity. Sometimes you get lucky. Now, we don't want to be lucky. We want an engineered solution that we know that goes into a vehicle, and if somebody's having a problem or a question, we have the science that goes behind it. We steer them clear of where they need to go, and they're happy customers for years to come.
Yeah, that's so smart. Because I think about, I like getting lucky, but but you got to engineer the stuff out. I just think about all the instances in the past where I had a lot of valve train issues, and I finally went to somebody that knew what was going on, and we found a solution based on engineering stuff, and it's so far off from where I was before, and it works. I don't have issues anymore. Um, and it's like that when you start mixing and matching stuff. That's when you're blowing seals out and you're blaming, oh, this throwout bearing's garbage. Well, you just overextended it and blew the seal out. That's got nothing to do with throwout bearing. But yeah, I like I like a whole package that's totally thought out and engineered. Like that makes sense.
I mean, that's been our whole approach to everything that we do. So when somebody calls our tech line, I mean, teach the guys here all the time. I mean, Paul's been with me now going on 18 years. So somebody like Paul has had a lot of experience in developing, and he's the one engineering a lot of this stuff with, another engineer. And so again, when you can do CAD simulations and then real world testing, you end up with a product that will speak for itself.
Yeah. Do you have a setup for the Fairlane yet?
We're working on that one. Yep. That one's
Okay.
in the pipeline.
Perfect.
Really to me, when I have somebody who's coming to me and asks me that question, some people are the absolute, what I call KISS, keeping it simple. And they say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And I subscribe to that school, and that's what you want. We don't talk people into hydraulics. Now, there's pros and cons. As my experience is that a Z-bar is old technology and it has a certain feel and performance to it. You really are asking multiple items that are swinging to net you a linear motion at the end of the day. So there's naturally this camming over effect that occurs with Z bars, and unless it's fully optimized, it's a series of compromises, and especially drag racing where you're putting a lot of torque. The motor wants to tear itself out of the chassis, so naturally the Z bar is moving around quite a bit. And then there's always this argument of what space can you afford to give up? Is it header space, Z-bar space? And you're always fighting with one and the other. And really, when you think about it, we don't run mechanical brakes anymore. I mean, I think we've gone to hydraulic brake systems some moons ago.
They
So
call
why
them
should we
juice
still
brakes these days.
yeah, juice brakes. My God, what a neat concept. So the same thing goes with hydraulics. I mean, with the designs that we're coming out with and our offering, we've solved a lot of the problems that keep people from wanting to go in. We've designed a kit. It's comes with instructions and videos and support, and they're application specific. And we anticipated so many factors into the design. There really isn't a lot of argument other than somebody doesn't want to spend the money or they're just simply not comfortable with the concept. But the reliability is there. I mean, cars, OEMs have hydraulics and they go 200,000 miles, fairly effortlessly.
Rich's 65 GTO goes almost 200,000 miles. What do you put on it? 170,000 since you restored it?
Nice. I mean, we're dealing with so many different types of conversion, people putting different motors. One of the ones that was kind of challenging at first to do was Fox Body. A popular platform. I own 3 of them myself, and I have since they were new. In fact, I had a 79 many years ago, and then I bought the 88, and I still own that car today. A one owner, a Fox Body guy is pretty unusual, but the guy in the mirror is getting a little grayer over the years. So anyhow, yeah. So, when we looked at doing the Fox Body, guys are putting modular motors in, and that twin cam motor in that engine compartment is tight. I mean, even getting a clutch cable to fit over the valve cover on certain, engines, whether it was a Lincoln motor or whatever they're pulling the motor from. And we're like, how do you design a hydraulic system to be able to fit? We weren't the first to try to do a Fox hydraulics. We did our Lightfoot series, and I have one still in my car today. And it's one of those things where I don't want to sell something that I wouldn't use myself. But as we start looking into the having a different cylinder to our disposal, we start looking at a redesign. And so our Fox Body kit is so simple to install, and it all fits, right onto the original pedal hanger. Now, having the freedom to not be working around the OEM clutch pedal, freed up the design. So, when we sell a stealth system, it always comes with a new clutch pedal as part of the kit. The reason for that is that we have to look at attachment points and how that pedal is going to interact with the master cylinder. So when we built the Fox and the SN95, we have a simple bracket that bolts onto the 2 left-hand bolts of the hanger, and then the new arm goes up and the cylinder attaches directly to the arm. We're not going through the shaft of the other side, which is prone to flexing over time because that square drive tends to underload. is not stable. Having the cylinder directly mounted to the arm, you can stab that clutch pedal pretty much as hard as you want, and it can take it. And we wanted to make it so that it was stable, strong, easy to install. And so the customers were basically in love with it. And then when we have the cylinder, the lines, we utilize the original clutch rod hole. So we're not modifying the car to install these kits. We really try to make it so that it is literally zero modification to the hanger or to the firewall. And we even tried to think about how quickly and easily it is to install one. I think it's our Camaro kit. It comes pre-assembled. You literally slide the bracket into the hanger after you've gotten the clutch pedal shaft into the hanger assembly. You slide the bracket on, you literally clamp it to the hanger, and you lock it in place, run the lines through, and you literally are done with the installation. So nobody wants to spend a lot of time underneath the dash. We get it.
I hate that.
Yes. So that's another reason why, there's a multitude of reasons why people don't want to go hydraulic. But in this day and age, and especially with what you're doing, Bill, with your system, for those who are drag racing, that's a winning combination to pick the right clutch, being able to control it, and having a great hydraulic system as a foundation.
Well, I can't argue with you there. Thank you for the plug.
Sure. Like I
But
said, we
yeah,
were at the PRI show. I guess somehow I missed that you even made that piece. So as soon as I saw it, I went like, "Hey, that's
yeah, it's had a lot of success with a lot of different setups for sure. So, and people ask why I don't run it anymore in my own car, and it kind of became apparent once I got above 1200 horsepower tire that the clutch got so aggressive that the tuning window became so small for that it just made sense to make the change to a slipper clutch. Um, and yeah, since I've done that, it's been better because prior to that, the car was great with it, but once I started hitting the up arrow, the whole clutch program started to go the other direction. It became really challenging on the street with the clutch aggressive enough to hold all that. And then tuning it with the clutch controller, that tuning window became super, super small. So it was just a natural progression. So,
well, I think it's great that we're still seeing track. Go ahead.
yeah, that's,
It's
I
like a
don't,
drug. You want more.
I think your mic is muted, Rich. I didn't hear what you said.
I don't understand the words that are coming out of your mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bruce, we've been on here almost an hour and a half.
Yes.
Rich, you got any other questions for the guy?
Yeah, I know that we get a lot of questions regarding the DCT, from Tremec. People are asking us when we can expect that. There has been some noise about releasing it. I'm anticipating that maybe 2027 we should be seeing something in the DCT side of the market.
Well, I don't know if we want to dive into that right near the
I'm
end.
just saying, though, we do get those questions that are, people are running sticks. It's good to see the sticks, but that is something for another day. That the DCT is something that people are not really wanting to run the traditional automatic, but they love the DCT, which is technically a manual transmission, computer controlled.
Yeah. I know they're in a lot of OEM cars, and they work really, really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're pretty slick.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into our questions that we ask every guest at the end, and I'll start it off. We call this first batch the TKO round. Maybe we should change this to the TKX round.
There you go.
Yeah. So, Bruce, what's the first car that you owned and or modified?
First car I owned was a 1970 Chevelle Malibu two-door hardtop. Yeah, I started with a Chevelle. I had a friend with a 72 Chevelle. I tinkered on his car, and I found this car. It was, affordable, and it was available. I drove the car for a couple of years, and then I was looking for something, I don't know, a little more sporty. So, I was going to college. I needed
A little
something
faster.
more.
Faster is what he meant to say.
I needed something that was just better suited for what I needed. And I found a 79 Mustang, and the Mustang was new and different, and I liked it so much, I just continued to buy them and drive them and became a Ford guy.
I love that answer.
That killed the conversation, didn't it?
Not for me, Bruce. Not for me.
Wow. There's so many. Yeah, outside of this, even the scope of what we do, I think a lot of this engine management that we have been getting the power that you're able to make. You think about, even I remember at a presentation with Carroll Shelby and him saying, someday we're going to have 1,000 horsepower street car. And I remember about a year or two later, they came out with, the first Shelby that was, 1,000 horsepower. And now we don't even blink an eye at that. 1,000, you're like, yeah, all right, 1,000, that's cute. What else do you got, kind of thing.
Yeah,
That's a lot of power. Yeah. I mean, a streetable car making that kind of power. I mean, so like I said, the technology, and from my end, I have to deal with that power. How do you get that power to the ground? When I talk to non-enthusiasts and you say 800 to 1,000 horsepower, they think you've lost your mind. And I'm going like, I'm thinking like, okay, 12, 1,400 horsepower now are things that I have to deal with on the phone. Not uncommon.
Well, it is quite possible that we've lost our minds. That is possible.
Maybe.
Yeah, and Rich, let's add that was 17 pounds of boost. Now you're putting what, 22 to it, 23? Yeah. So be curious to know what's the math work out to for how much tire is that? That'll do it. Nice. All right. Now I'm gonna palm shift it up into third gear. All right, Bruce, if you could spend one day with someone, who would it be and what would you do?
Wow. I think if Carroll Shelby was still around, I would love to spend a day with him because his approach to problem solving and not being afraid to push the limits. I think that's somebody I would love to have spent more time with. I did have the good fortune of meeting Carroll on a number of occasions and even having lunch with him one time, but I didn't get to know the man in the way that many of us really should have.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I've got a small collection of cars, but I love doing different things with them. I was in the shop today, I've had a 1965 Mustang Coupe. It's really kind of what started my desire to do what I'm doing today. The car started life originally as a 6-cylinder automatic way before I owned it. But, I like tinkering and building and improving. I like the hand-on experience of taking something, either you're fixing, making it better. And in my cars, I see something that's working or not working, something that somebody else is not doing, you know, and how can I make it better? And with the tools that we have today, my goodness, you can go from a concept to 3D printing something to building a prototype in a pretty short order. And you can go through so much CAD modeling. And in this day and age, in this hobby, you can send parts to various companies like, Cut, Send, Cut, or is it Send, Cut? Yeah, Send, Cut, Send. So I apologize. But companies like that, where you can, even an enthusiast can put together some pretty neat stuff, even if they don't have the ability in their own equipment set, and be able to let their minds run free and build stuff that's different than what somebody else is doing. And I think that's the exciting part of this hobby.
I agree. All right. What in your opinion, Bruce, is a secret to stick shift racing?
Consistency. I truly believe if it's a lot of it's technique. It really, really is. No matter what your equipment, you could have the worst set of equipment, but you have to know your equipment and be consistent with it. A classic case or story to that is we have a customer locally who has got a 96 Cobra stick car, all factory, and he likes doing some club racing here at the Firebird Raceway. And he was not doing well at all, despite his best effort. And it turned out his clutch cable was so bound up that when we put a hydraulic system in it, not only was he doing better, he actually placed at the end of the series in the top 3 just for consistency's sake. It was not him. It wasn't necessarily the car. The motor would put out the same power every time. But if you can get rid of the variables and so you're consistent, in your bracket racing or whatever, you're going to do well.
That's awesome. I love that. And I agree.
Okay. I have done some drag racing. Before I got into road racing, I used to go down to, I should say, and I lived in Vermont. We used to go up to Montreal and go to Saint Air Speedway. And my buddies and I would go watch, Bob Glidden and so forth back in the day. And, we were watching these passes and thinking how much faster it was going to get. So me personally doing a pass, I did some at Sears Point Raceway with my blue coupe. I'll give you that story because I have other stories. But the blue coupe is my 92 Mustang. In fact, it's not in the video at the moment, but behind me there's a picture of it. But my 92 coupe was set up for road racing. the NorCal club, we went from road racing, and on Sunday we switched to drag racing. And back then they had to move the K-walls. When you switch, you literally are dedicated to drag racing. So I knew nothing about drag racing as far as doing it, right? So I knew that I needed to try to change my tune a little bit, loosen up the shocks, disconnect the sway bars, maybe change some air pressures in the tires. So I'm all queued up and I'm like waiting for things to happen. And the next thing you know, I got a guy point to me, says, "You're first up." I'm like, shit. So I'm quickly throwing my helmet on, trying to grab my belts, and I get up there, right? And I'm not used to the adhesion, and I go to take off and I stall the engine. I'm like, what a rookie mistake. So I fire the engine back up and I go ripping off, and I still managed to pull off. I think it was a 15.5 or something with all that was going on. And I'm like, well, only direction is up, right? So I'll give you the short story. It was just random, club members just, in the queue. And I remember getting queued up with a 427 big block Shelby Cobra Roadster. Now, granted, it wasn't an original, but it was like a Superformance. And he was in the right lane. I was in the left lane. And by now, I was figuring out how much power to dial in, because I'm on road race tires. I'm not on drag radials or nothing. So I knew in the first 2 gears, I had to modulate the throttle just to keep the thing from turning. And by 3rd gear, I could be flat on it, and 4th gear flat on it. So I was getting used to the tree, and I caught a good light. And the other, his name was Richard, caught a great light, and we just go tearing off. And I could hear him, but I never saw him. And I managed to stay ahead of him with my 5-liter. And of course, I have a Vortex supercharger. I kind of maybe forgot to tell you that part. So I have Vortex supercharger, and it makes about 8 pounds of boost. So like I said, I'm making about 500 horsepower. So I ended up winning the round. So the following morning when I came to breakfast, we were staying at the same hotel. Richard comes up to me and goes, "What the hell do you have in that car?" I said, "Oh, it's just a little 5-liter, And he goes, "Ah, bullshit,
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Bruce, give us your social media plugs, your company website, all that kind of stuff so people can find you.
Yeah, we're on social media. I'm on Facebook at Modern Driveline, I think is and we're also on Instagram. Don't really spend any time on TikTok. Our website is moderndriveline.com, where we have a whole lot of information. We're constantly building new content there. So love to see some more drag racing content, Bill.
Okay, I'll work on it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of people look to us as a 5 and 6-speed conversion specialist, which we are. But at the end of the day, we are a driveshaft or a driveline, manual shift driveline company. If you need a flywheel, a clutch, a bell housing, or hydraulics, whether it's a 3-speed or a 4-speed, we can help you.
Bruce, how many SKU numbers do you have in your system? Do you know?
Product SKUs, we're approaching 3,000 SKUs.
Wow, that's awesome. All right. Well, we'll wrap this thing up. You can find the Clutch Burners podcast on all the podcast platforms. Obviously, if you're listening to us, you've found us. And we would love to see you in Clutch Burners merch, t-shirts or whatever. So head over to stickracing.com, and you can also grab Stick Shift Nation merch there as well. And I think that's about it. We guys good? All right. We'll wrap this up. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Okay. And we are out.